Today we're continuing our series on getting creative with the Okiolabs camera. And just a reminder, if you don't have the camera, you are definitely going to want to get it. It is a great price for what you get. And so I've got my camera right here. And again, it's this small, like it's not anything huge, which is really nice because it makes transporting to wherever you need very nice. If you get the one that has a whiteboard, it comes with the marker and a rag as well. So make sure you do purchase your camera. And at the end, I'll give you some links if you are just joining us for the first time in this series. Today, we're going to talk about a strategy. It's called Sketch and Explain. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use our Okio camera and we're going to walk through how to have students, again, we want students to be those creators instead of just always consuming that information, and having our students take that ownership, and then they are going to start to sketch and explain their thinking. So I'm going to walk through just a couple different examples that I have. And so let me go ahead and pull up our camera right here, and you can already kind of see just a couple different ideas relating with science. So I've got my camera up, and again, students will sketch their knowledge about a topic. So right here, we've got the life cycle of a butterfly. Again, the students will write out each of those different steps in those steps on the life cycle of a butterfly, which can be really great as students are trying to explain what they're trying to do during each of those different steps. And so students, again, you'll allow them time to draw. So you can see that I've went ahead and I drew the egg, I drew the caterpillar, and so on. And so as students are drawing, the next step is then for them to explain. And so they would draw maybe separately, and then they would come over to the document camera, the Okio cam, and they would explain each of those different steps. And you can even have them hit that record button. So that way they are ready to go and they can record exactly what's happening in every single step. Another idea is maybe with solids, liquids, and gas. So students are explaining when it happens from a solid to a liquid. And so they're explaining what's happening when you go from a solid and it's melting to a liquid. They're explaining when you're at a liquid and you freeze it, it becomes a solid. And so again, they're going through all of these different explanations, and they're drawing out what is kind of happening in a diagram that is easy for other students to understand. And then the explain part, again, is using that Okio camera, hitting record, and then the students are explaining what's happening. Another example, maybe with the food web. So right here, we've got the food web, and students are able to explain those producers and those consumers. They can explain how it goes from, the plant, the grasshopper eats the plant, the bird eats the grasshopper, and so on until they get all the way to their bottom. And they are, again, they're sketching, and then they're using that record button on the Okio cam to explain what is happening during the food web and what's kind of this looking like. So again, those are just a couple examples, and now we're actually going to create our own. So I want to create one over the water cycle. So the first thing that might be really beneficial for students is that they're doing this on paper. And again, you wanted that really good blended instruction for the students. And so by doing that, I'm giving them just a blank piece of paper. So let me again pull up my nice little camera right here. And we've got our piece of paper. Okay, and again, I want my students to explain maybe, for example, the water cycle. So the first thing that I might have my students do is label what they're explaining. Okay. Once they've got their words at the top of the page, they can then begin to maybe draw all of the different steps in the water cycle. So we've got the sun, And again, this is where you're allowing your students to be creative. They could work in groups and they could create these different icons for the class. Then they'll be able to explain it by hitting that record. Okay, so once the sun provides the heat, we also have water evaporating. So let's go ahead and let's draw out our water evaporating. And that is usually caused from the sun. So again, I'm going to kind of draw some arrows going up towards the sun. And I want my students to focus on those vocabulary words. And that is coming maybe from like the ocean or the river or the lakes or the streams. Once we talk about the evaporation, students might talk about condensation and the water, from the clouds. And we're beginning to form clouds based on that evaporation. And again, I want my students to know those vocabulary words, so they must include those in their drawings. And it can be up to you what you kind of want from your students as you ask them to explain what they're doing. And again, this is a nice kind of bluish cloud. It's not yet gray. It's not going to rain just yet. But then students can add color onto their drawings to help explain the different concepts. Okay, once I've got my water cycle and I've got those two steps, then we're going to talk about how the clouds rise and it cools and it causes that precipitation. So now we've got some gray clouds. It's going to start to rain. And again, this is where your students are drawing out and they're coloring maybe some of those different steps in these different cycles. Okay. And then finally, water's falling into the ground and lake, and that's where that collection happens. And so again, it's collecting all of it into the ground. And this could be in the rivers, the oceans, the lakes. Okay, so I've got all of my steps there for this water cycle. And then again, what the students are going to do is they are going to hit record. And all they have to do is explain what's happening. So they can then take their water cycle and they can explain what is happening. So the sun right here, it heats up the earth. Once it heats up the earth, it helps with the evaporation. So then all of this water from oceans, puddles, rivers, and lakes are coming up because of that sun and the heat. Then water creates maybe a cloud and it's creating all that condensation. And it's going to then move into the next step where the cloud rises and cools, and that causes that precipitation. Once we have the precipitation, it's going to fall into the grounds, the lakes, the oceans, the rivers. And again, that water cycle begins again. Okay, so that's one way. Again, students can pause, they can stop their recording of their water cycle, and then you have that recording that you can share with parents or other students. Another idea with this water cycle is you could make it hands-on. It doesn't have to just be on paper. Your students can actually have maybe some type of Lego or some type of object to also represent. Maybe if you're doing the moon, a great one with that is the Oreos. So you could have actual Oreos with your students and have them explain those different parts as they're using hands-on activities to demonstrate all of that different knowledge that they're trying to do. So again, get creative with this. It does not just have to be a sketch, although sometimes that's the easiest when all you have is maybe some paper. But it can also be, with food or with objects, and then your students can really start to explain. Another idea is right here. I've got just a piece of paper with the water cycle. And what I might do with this example is use maybe like a pecha kucha type of idea. And so with pecha kucha, what that means is that my students have 20 seconds to explain each part of the water cycle. And so I would go and grab maybe a timer, and with that timer, I might do 20 seconds. Okay, and so once I've got my 20-second timer going, I can then have my students explain each of those different parts for 20 seconds each. And so again, they're talking about the sun heats up the earth, we have evaporation. And my students can place these little cards right here that I can hand them. Let me go ahead and pull up my Okiolabs. There we go. And so I've got my evaporation right here. And my students can place these vocab words right onto the paper. So that way they are ready to go. They can pull these words out. They know what words they're working on, and that can be provided as a scaffold. Or you could have your students write it on the piece of paper, but this kind of makes it a little bit more hands-on having those papers right there, because then they can add it right as they're explaining it. So again, pecha kucha is 20 seconds each, and my students are going to have 20 seconds for each of these words. Okay, so if I go ahead and hit my timer, my students can then start explaining. So right here, we've got the sun, and the sun is heating up the earth. And with that, we're using evaporation. And what that means is that there's water from the ocean, the river, and lakes, and it's sending all that water up because the sun, again, is getting that heat. Now that that part is over, the students will then have another 20 seconds to explain the next word, and so on. Or they could do their whole drawing in 20 seconds. Totally up to you and what you want your students to accomplish during this time. But these little vocab cards can really help as your students are explaining different pieces of the water cycle. And as they are trying to go over which part happens when, and then they can grab those words and explain. And again, they can hit that record button. They're able to record going over the water cycle or whatever they are going over in their drawing. And again, if you want to challenge your students, add it to a pecha kucha. Each word, they get 20 seconds. They start their timer. And as it's going, they have to explain each of these different vocabulary words, what's happening for 20 seconds or however long you decide. Or maybe you have them explain that whole drawing in 20 seconds. So that can be another challenge as well. And again, the last step when it comes to with the drawing of sketch and explain, it is publishing. So your students, again, they're going to hit record. Once they're done recording, they have something that they're ready to publish. So right here, I've got my little icon. They can come up here to that library folder. There's the 3 videos I did today. And then they can go, or you can take their videos and go to YouTube. You can add those videos by uploading those videos. And I can just click and drop all of those 3 videos that maybe those 3 different groups did. And I can send those videos off to their parents as soon as they are finished and they're in my library. So again, what an easy way to publish and kind of share what your students are doing. They can share them with other students to explain their knowledge, with their parents, or with your community at your school. And don't forget, if you are interested in purchasing one of these Okiolabs, they are a great classroom resource that you're able to use with your students. And again, they're so easy to pull out and use, and they're easy for your students to plug into their Chromebooks as well and use. And then you're able to take their videos and, again, publish them for the world to see. If you click on this slide deck, which is in the YouTube description, and I'm also going to add it into the YouTube chat, you are able to click on slide number 5 where it says purchase, and it's going to take you to some buying options. So I have this one right here, the Okiolabs T Plus, and it is a great resource, and I'm so glad that I was able to purchase this item. So again, you can get it on Amazon. And there is the whiteboard piece as well. So make sure you check this out and just kind of think about, how are you using this in your classroom? I would love to know, because again, when we have students become more of those creators and not consumers, we're able to see them do a lot of cool things in the classroom. So cannot wait to see how you're using this in your classroom and what you're doing with your students. Thanks, guys.